Hey, hi, hello. Welcome to Diana Emerson today. We're listening to Secrets of the Morgue, John Doe number 5.
Before someone else got killed. You think they're going to get away with it? They're taunting the police. I dare you to come and catch me.
A shocking murder becomes a dark mystery. The victim's body holds the key to convicting the killer. Every fiber is a clue. Every wound is a piece of the puzzle. In these cases, it's up to the medical examiner to find the crucial evidence and catch the murderer. This is Secrets of the Morgue.
Trumptown is a nice, peaceful place.
There's a high population of northern visitors that come in during the winter months. It has a lot of wooded areas that attract a host of animals. So there is a lot of hunting that goes on.
On a cool winter morning, two men out hog hunting make their way down a dirt side road.
They noticed birds circling around an area.
The hunters trail the vulture into a thick palm grove and make a horrifying discovery.
They found a body, partially decomposed. It was about 100, 150 yards or so, give or take, in the woods from the edge of a road. The body was nude. There was no clothing, no identification, nothing. The legs were positioned in one place. One arm was down, another arm was up, and the victim was on his back. I immediately thought we had a homicide. With a victim of a crime, especially a homicide. I wouldn't be the one to speak for that person, the one that can't speak for himself anymore.
The remains are sent to the county medical examiner, Dr. Riazul Imami.
Medical examiners' main motivation is that we are looking into unknown. These homicides or any unnatural deaths, we would like to see why they die.
Dr. Imami begins the autopsy.
First thing you want to do is to identify the victim so that you can communicate with the family that your loved one has died. Most of the soft tissues is gone from the chest, all the organs, and the abdomen. And the head had some skin on it. The lower part of the body had the skin, but all was leather type, or post-mortem effects. You will identify with the fingerprints, but in this particular case, you have only the bones left.
In 1994, DNA testing is not widely available, so Dr. Imami examines the skull for clues to the victim's identity.
Without any soft tissues, we are looking at the sutures to determine the age and the sex of the deceased. Approximate age was between 25 and 35. And the second thing, the eyebrows area, we see some roughness. We are looking at a male skull.
The young man's body reveals a deeply unsettling fact.
The scrotum and testicles were not there. That has been removed.
Dr. Imami continues to look for ways to identify the victim. few teeth in the skull can't be linked to dental records, but they do offer investigators clues about who the young man might be.
Poor dental hygiene led us in a direction as far as victimology goes.
Florida is sort of a magnet for not only tourists, but transient people who may be traveling and looking for work. So they do end up here. They do end up sometimes living in our wooded areas and homeless camps. We go to missing persons report. We go to suspicious persons reports. We go to any reports that were filed in that general area. We'll talk to people that come through that area for a 24-hour period to see if they've seen anything.
Transient people really don't know anybody in the area outside of a few homeless people themselves, and they can be here today and gone tomorrow, and nobody would report a missing person.
Murders or bodies or bones are big enough to get on the news, but at this point it wasn't leading the news. We didn't know enough about it. All we knew was bones in the woods.
No one has any information about the young man killed in the woods. Detectives return to the medical examiner to see if he's found any more clues.
We x-ray all the skeletonized bodies or decomposed bodies. We can see in the ankle area there was a rod, small rod.
Dr. Amami's discovery of a medical implant is a huge lead.
They have serial numbers on them, and in most cases, you can find out where and who received that particular instrument. I went back to the manufacturer on the pen. They couldn't tell me who it was given to, but they could give me a list of the hospitals that received that batch of pens. I issued subpoenas to each of those hospitals for any person that fit that general description that had received surgery on that particular leg and asked for their medical records. So myself and another detective sat at our desks calling every person that we could find in those records to see if they were still around. And we went through them all and didn't come up with any. Everybody was still alive and kicking.
After months of relentless investigation, the team exhausts every avenue to identify the young man found in the woods of Charlotte County.
We could not identify this person. This person is a John Doe. The manner of death has to be a homicide. But in this case, we don't know the cause of death.
Without a name, a cause of death, or any leads, the 1994 murder of John Doe in the woods of Charlotte County turns cold.
Giving up is not an option. Even if the case went cold and went on the shelf.
Then in early 1996, a pair of crimes in the nearby city of Northport grabs Detective Hobbs's attention.
Northport Police Department had responded to a call to where a dog had brought home a skull when it had been out in the woods. Well, they did a search back into the wooded area. That's where they came upon more remains. So the deputies started searching back through the woods. And then another body was discovered, not too far away from where the skull was found.
Investigators fear this is more than a gruesome coincidence.
Because of our first discovery, I thought maybe we have a problem. And Rick thought the same thing.
I gathered my reports and my crime scene photographs and went up to Northport PD.
Detectives believe the 1994 murder of John Doe in Charlotte County could be connected to the two new sets of remains found near Northport.
And I sat down with my sergeant up there and started going over his crime scenes. started looking at the photographs. Not only the photographs of the body, photographs of the scenes, even down to the type of roads they were off of, the distance back in the woods. If you didn't know which scene was which, you would not be able to tell them apart. We believe that the same person was responsible for all three bodies.
Investigators believe the 1994 murder of a John Doe in Charlotte County is linked to two fresh murders outside the nearby city of North Port.
I had a gut feeling that we had a problem.
The remains discovered in North Port are sent to the local medical examiner, Dr. James Wilson.
I'm oriented towards structural things and understanding them. How is this body that was a natural anatomical specimen then altered that resulted in death? We're the ones who take the responsibility to determine, was this case a homicide or was it an accident?
Faced with two potential victims, Dr. Wilson begins examining the skeletal remains of John Doe number 2.
We had the skull, most of the vertebrae, most all of the ribs, the upper and lower extremities, I think clavicles and pelvis, and the lower jaw. This body looked like it had been present in the environment for probably a few months.
The state of the remains rules out fingerprinting as a means of identification.
There are features of male and female skeletons that are suggestive of the gender. This body is clearly a male. The individual was in the 30s or 40s age range. The stature was 73.5 inches. That would be based on multiple measurements of multiple long bones.
Without dental records or unique physical characteristics of the bones, the medical examiner can't go further with an identification.
We've done as much as we can to identify the victim.
You don't know who he is, who he hangs out with, where he works. Has he got a wife, brothers, sisters, family? All you had was the bones.
With the limited remains, Dr. Wilson also struggles to determine cause of death.
You could stab somebody in the chest with a knife that didn't hit any ribs, poke a hole in the heart, and the person would die, but still there can be no marks that you could tell because the soft tissue is all gone. All I can say is that there was some sort of homicidal violence, but it was undetermined exactly what.
Dr. Wilson moves on to autopsy the other victim found near North Port.
This was a body that had no clothing associated and no obvious personal belongings. On the body, there were large numbers of larval insects at 3 different stages of their development, which fit with a time since death of perhaps a few weeks. The decomposition wasn't so far advanced. It looked like a Caucasian male. The approximate stature was 65 to 67 inches for his age range. My guesstimate was 20s to 30s. Because the body, as I recall, looked relatively young.
Dr. Wilson is able to investigate cause of death on the remains of John Doe number 3.
There were 4 openings in the skin of the lower central chest and the upper abdominal region. Those represented 4 stab wounds to the body. I could see a mark on the skin that extended across the lower chest from side to side just below the level of the breast, and then began to go posterior and further up in the back of the body, which looked like this person may have been, for instance, tied to a tree.
There's no doubt the final moments of this man's life were filled with sheer terror.
There was an acute injury to the big toe aspect of the foot, a recent cut or laceration. I believe, that this man was running unclothed through that dense underbrush before he became somehow overwhelmed and killed. That would take desperation just to run through palmettos naked. Yeah, I think you'd have to be running for your life.
Dr. Wilson makes another disturbing finding, one that matches Dr. Imami's discovery on the 1994 John Doe found in Charlotte County.
The male genitalia was absent from the body.
The teeth from both of Dr. Wilson's bodies also share similarities with the earlier victim.
The two individuals that I looked at, they had features that suggested they hadn't been to a dentist much, if at all, in a number of years prior to the time that they died.
So what this was telling us is that our victims were basically street people.
Investigators believe the three John Does are connected.
The similarities, relatively desolate locations, bodies hidden, bodies unclothed, and with genital mutilation, would suggest an individual serial killer.
Once you realize that you have a serial killer, the pressure is unbelievable. The pressure mainly came from within. It came from inside me.
Lieutenant Gandy is charged with leading the task force to catch the killer behind the murder of three John Does.
We put out what we call a BOLA, Beyond the Lookout, nationwide to homicide units, investigative units, telling them we're dealing with a serial killer. We kept the public informed. We let the media know as much as we could.
It really becomes kind of a sense of responsibility to do something, because when someone's actively out there killing, not only is it reporting the news, you're trying to do whatever you can to get this person caught so it stops.
As the task force ramps up, investigators get an urgent call.
Two Charlotte County Public Works employees were taking a break. They were working in an area that was heavily wooded, and they decided to take a walk in the woods.
And then come upon the skull.
Detective Hobbs and Lieutenant Gandy race to the scene.
What I saw was the skull of a white man. It wasn't completely decomposed. The skull had flesh and hair. We all spread out and started searching the area for additional remains.
I found the torso. The remains were mostly skeletonized, having some skin and some tissue left.
Not too far from that, I found what was left of the pelvis. No legs, no spine, just cut right off the top of the pelvis. Then I looked off in the distance, and I saw something white laying underneath the tree. And from my vantage point, it kind of looked like it possibly could be a homeless person covered up in sleep. When I started getting close, I noticed a hand kind of sticking a little bit out from old carpet padding. It looked like blood had dripped on the hands. That's when I called out to Lieutenant Gandy. I think I've got another one.
A serial killer is targeting young men across southwestern Florida.
We discovered John Doe number 4 and John Doe number 5.
Marginalized communities are easy targets for serial killers. If somebody's a homeless person and they're living in shelters half the time and they don't show up, it could be weeks or months till somebody actually reports them missing. That's a time gap that is favorable to a serial killer.
I just wanted to be sure we solved it before someone else got killed.
The bodies of John Doe number 4 and John Doe number 5 are sent to Dr. Riazul Imami.
because of the close proximity, I think the same person most likely is the suspect.
He begins the autopsy of John Doe number 4.
Most of the organs, soft tissues have gone, and in the pelvis are all bones. This means that the person has been dead for months, but from the skull and from the pelvis, you can say that the person is a male. We have difficulty in identifying the body because there is no fingerprints available.
Dr. Amami moves on to autopsy John Doe number 5.
It was not too long ago the person had died, probably about 18 to 24 hours or so.
After 2 years and 5 bodies, this is the first set of remains found so soon after death. There is a chance it could reveal much more about the victim and the killer.
On the external part of the body, there were some rope ligature marks on the neck, on the chest, and also on the abdominal area. And then there were some rope markings on the legs and also on the wrist.
It's clear the victim was tied up. And just like John Doe number 3, this young man's body tells a terrifying tale.
In this particular case, there was some blood there under the rope markings on both sides of the addendum. The cause of death was asphyxia, secondary to strangulation.
Dr. Amami looks over the pelvis and makes a disturbingly familiar finding.
We see some post-mortem excision of the genitals. It was very gruesome.
He inspects every inch of the wound.
We are looking for all the evidences on the surface to see if there is any foreign material there. This was a very sharp type of incision, and the base of the wound was quite clean.
Dr. Amami's scrutiny pays off. He finds a tiny chip of blue paint on the pelvis.
That paint chip was taken by the law enforcement.
The paint recovered from John Doe number 5's body is sent for analysis.
Right there during the examination, once we got all the swabbing and all that done, any particulates or anything on the body, then the forensic technicians rolled his fingerprints and submitted it into the database.
Finally, detectives get what they need. A name.
The victim was Richard Montgomery. His age was about 21 years and a Caucasian male.
Now we have someone, 5 bodies that's been identified, so we're excited now that we've got somewhere to start. Now we can go back and find family, we can find friends, we can find out what his normal routines were, you know, who he may have come in contact with, you know, what kind of things does he do, and that just opens up the whole investigation.
Detectives look into the life of Richard Montgomery.
Richie was kind of a happy-go-lucky guy. He lived out on the streets. He didn't hold down a full-time job anywhere for very long. He fit the profile of our victims. We interviewed his family and some of his friends, some of the people that were with him the last day he was still alive. And during those interviews, we found out Richie was telling a couple of guys that he was going to make an easy $200 that night.
Police scrutinize the evidence to build a profile of the predator who killed Richard Montgomery and the other young men.
It seems like all the bodies have in common is they're all out in a rural, desolate area. They're all males, white males, and they all appear to be displayed somewhat. On their backs, no clothing, no ID, and the genitalia was removed.
Poe's body tells me that the perpetrator is somebody who gets a sadistic thrill out of humiliating their victim.
You'll generally find there's a huge sexual component when bodies are posed. It is a presentation that the killer is giving to the police It's almost like Catch Me If You Can.
The perpetrator is what they call a sexual sadist. Basically, someone that gets pleasure and gets his sexual gratification through what it does to others.
Investigators look for someone in Richard's life who could fit the profile of this violent, disturbed killer.
We were looking at numerous suspects, sexual offenders in the area, people that had been around Richie or had had a problem with Richie. We had the task force running down every lead we could find, but we still didn't have a name.
Then detectives get a lead.
I received a phone call from a lieutenant out of the Correctional Institute, and he told me, I've got an inmate out here that says he knows who your killer is.
David Payton is a young drifter in jail. He tells police of a terrifying encounter near Charlotte County.
The guy was coming around, offering him money to go out in the woods and pose nude. He says, sure. So he jumps in the car, and they take off driving. And then all of a sudden, this guy's demeanor changes. He's from nice and submissive to, very hard and ordering around. And then the car gets stuck in a mud hole. Mr. Payton says, I want to get out and help push. But the driver wouldn't let him out of the car.
The driver orders him to steer the vehicle. When Payton takes the wheel, he happens to glance at the back seat.
Payton looks around and he sees a tarp, camera, rope, a knife back there. And now he says, ooh.
Fearing for his life, Payton slams on the gas the second the car hits the road.
Mr. Payton said, I floored it, took off. Next thing you know, the driver reported the car stolen. I said, what? I immediately send down to the main office and have the case report pulled. And the person that reported it stolen was Daniel Conahan Jr.
Detectives suspect the man David Payton barely escaped could be the serial killer they're hunting.
My first response was looking up and saying, thank you, Lord. We got a name.
Investigators have a suspect in the murder of Richard Montgomery and 4 other men. But they need more than a jailhouse tip to arrest the vicious killer.
We put him under 24/7 surveillance. We had trackers on his car. We had cameras on his house. Anytime he left the house, there was probably 4 to 6 detectives following him. Also had helicopters and or airplanes when he went out. So he was covered.
They dig into the life of the suspect.
We start doing background and find out who Daniel Conahan is.
Conahan initially joined the Navy. He ended up getting discharged. He came down to Florida and he stayed with his parents. He went to nursing school and became a licensed practical nurse. The first time we could place him in Charlotte County was in March of 1993.
1993. It's right before our first body's found.
Looking to tie him directly to the murders, detectives track Conahan's habits.
We found in his credit card records regular purchases being made at Walmart's, Kmart's, all around similar amounts. He was buying cameras, rope, tarps, pliers, knives, and replacement supplies for the murder kit.
For investigators, This discovery is a red flag.
These kill kits are very common amongst serial killers. These are people who have spent a lot of time thinking about and planning how they're going to kill someone.
The task force plans an elaborate sting operation.
We picked younger undercover officers that I knew would be able to take care of themselves.
The undercover officers pose as homeless drifters and wait patiently for Daniel Conahan to approach.
We created a homeless camp. We built it in the woods. We didn't really want to lead him. We wanted him to lead us.
In late May 1996, the suspect makes a move.
He made contact with one of our undercovers a couple times before he finally said, hey, we'll go out in the woods and pose for some nude pictures.
Daniel Conahan takes the officer to a remote palm grove.
We've got detectives actually in the brush watching them.
We had a sniper in a foxhole that we dug just to be sure that nothing happened to our undercovers.
He lures the officer deep into the woods.
Going there, he talked about the bondage or the photographs.
The undercover and Conahan went back there, but for some reason everything was going good. Just all of a sudden, just something clicked. One of those demeanor changes.
Conahan backed away and he said, okay, maybe later. He backed out, and that was that.
Undeterred, police continue surveillance of the suspect. They soon notice a chilling pattern of behavior.
We had followed Mr. Conahan at several locations where he could get out of the car and just feel the area.
A serial killer will dump bodies and will often visit and revisit as a way to relive the memories and the thrill of killing people.
The task force decided we're going to do a search. Maybe there's some more bodies back there. We don't know.
They bring in extra manpower from police departments across southern Florida.
During the search, I had a detective from the Fort Myers Police Department come up to me. He says, yeah, we had one just like this.
The officer stuns Detective Hobbs with another story of someone encountering Daniel Conahan.
And that's when I said, what do you mean you had one just like this? He says, yeah, but our guy lived. I said, what?
Detectives interview the alleged attack victim, 26-year-old Stanley Burden, a sex offender serving time in an Ohio prison.
He said this person named Dan in a similar vehicle to Daniel Conahan offered him money to pose nude, offered him money for sex, offered him money to let him photograph him in bondage. This person tied him up, started photographing him, and he couldn't escape. And then the person wrapped a rope around his neck and tried to strangle him.
He was choking him. And this Dan guy says, why don't you just die? Make my job easier. Why don't you just die?
The attacker pauses, but he's not about to release his victim.
He says, I'm going to go back and get my chainsaw. When he walks away, Stanley Burden looks down, he sees a small pair of wire cutters. Well, he chains down the tree where he can get a hold of him, cuts himself loose, takes off running.
Wounded and bleeding, Stanley Burden tears through the dense underbrush until he reaches a road.
And that's when this trucker was going down the street and sees this guy running bloody and naked and picks him up and takes him to the hospital.
Dr. Riazul Amami compares Stanley Burden's neck injuries to the wounds on Richard Montgomery's body.
The hemorrhages in the soft tissues on the anterior and lateral aspects of the neck was there, and that matched with the rope markings outside.
Stanley Burden had permanent damage to his vocal cord or his throat. Every breath he takes really is kind of tied back to that moment when he crossed Daniel Conahan.
Investigators asked Stanley Burden to identify his attacker.
They had what we call a photo bank. 6 photographs. That thing no sooner hit the table, he says, "That's it," and identified Conahan. I was able to get a search warrant for his house and for his cars.
We decided it was time to try an interview with Mr. Conahan. We were going to serve the warrants. We were going to do it all at one time. We made the traffic stop in the parking lot of the Holiday Inn in Punta Gorda, and we had already had a room set up to do an interview with him.
Daniel Conahan Jr. agrees to speak with detectives.
I knew what I wanted to get out of him. I wanted to get a full confession. So your name has surfaced in this investigation, and we became very curious about you. So we wanted to get some questions answered. He was nice to me. I was nice to him. He was obviously smart. His upper body language was pretty good. Hitchhikers, have you ever had relationships with them? They get a hitchhiker and we have engaged and, they sort of come on again. But he started almost immediately tapping his leg. And you can see the tablecloth moving up and down like that really quick.
Lieutenant Gandy presses Conahan about the murders.
Richard Montgomery, the name sounds familiar. Any reason why? Just the paper and the paper and TV.
Daniel Conahan denies any involvement in the killings. Detectives know he's lying.
He denied lots of things like being into the bondage or offering people money for bondage and so forth, and we clearly had information on that. But I'm pretty much gone over everything you guys I can think of. No doubt in my mind that we have the right guy. For now, we have to prove that he killed these people.
As detectives are interviewing Daniel Conahan Jr. in the serial murder of 5 men, a search of the suspect's home turns up key evidence.
We found the backpack, and we found all the items that would have gone in the backpack. We found tarps, quarter-inch rope, a Polaroid camera, repairing knives.
Investigators also take a sample of paint from the suspect's car.
During the examination and autopsy, we took that paint chip from Richard Montgomery's body. The person who is committing the crime, he has left hard evidence.
The medical examiner recovered a little paint chip right by where the genitals had been removed. And we collected samples of paint from Mr. Conahan's cars. Now, the mercury had been painted numerous times, and the paint was flaking off. Well, the lab tested that paint. The paint sample that we recovered from Mr. Montgomery matched the exact paint off of the vehicle. The thickness of the layers, the pigments, all of that matched layer for layer.
After 2 years of investigation into the murder of 5 young men, detectives finally have found what they've been searching for, an unmistakable link between Conahan and Richard Montgomery.
It took 3 years or so before we were able to take him to trial. And he chose to have a trial by judge.
Testimony from detectives and the medical examiner formed the backbone of the prosecution's case.
Daniel Conahan Jr. was coming around offering street people money to go out in the woods and pose nude in a bondage type situation.
Conahan lured Richard Montgomery into the woods.
Daniel Conahan tied him up to these trees, and he couldn't escape.
There were markings on the back of the body made by the bark of the tree. On the front of the body, I could see some markings there could show that this is a rope marking. And then we go into the neck. The rope has pressed the throat, and that caused the suffocation and asphyxia.
Another key connection Dr. Amami makes for the prosecution comes from the suspect's experience working as a nurse.
He has an access to surgical tools working there in the hospital. So to me, the external genitalia which has been removed on Montgomery's body, he has used sharp instruments like a sharp scalpel.
After only 25 minutes of deliberation, the judge reaches a verdict.
He took a recess and then came back up, found him guilty.
Daniel Conahan Jr. is sentenced to death for the cruel and horrific killing of Richard Montgomery.
Richie, he was in his early 20s, but he was still a kid. He was loved by his family, and he loved his family. And unfortunately, there was a monster waiting in the woods, and that monster took advantage of Richard's poor decision and murdered him.
Eventually, few more John Does are identified, and their families notified of their deaths.
Daniel Conahan was only actually charged with the one offense.
No charges have been laid in connection with these cases, though Conahan remains the prime suspect.
When they don't take him to trial for other cases, you're sparing a family more court time and more publicity and more pain. They have to sit there and listen to how their son or their daughter was murdered and mutilated when you can accomplish the same thing and get a death penalty case on one case. Why subject them to that?
They had a lot of really seasoned, committed, and passionate investigators, and it didn't matter to them if these were homeless people, if they were unidentified people. It didn't matter because they were out there and they were determined to catch this person and to make their case.
We need the medical examiner to establish that we have a homicide and to prove how a homicide victim was killed. That would lead us to who committed this crime. That makes your case.
Once we complete our work, this means that somebody is speaking for the dead. That's very important.